I haven't made a video for a couple of days, probably a better part of a week, because I've been doing a bit of tidying up and spring cleaning, covered in paint, and the weather's been incredibly dry here. We had some very warm weather, like up until about 3 days ago. It was like summer, and it's still very dry. There's no sign of any kind of participation or moisture coming in, which is very unusual for the northwest of Ireland. So I guess this solar storm that's hitting us at the moment is affecting the weather. I noticed from the flags blowing, the wind is blowing from a direction it doesn't normally blow from the north. So yeah, it's interesting. There's a huge wind coming down from the north, and I think that's directly it's this the sword of Odin, the spear of Wotan. Sleipnir is galloping down, and things like spring cleaning and tidying up and is what happens. You're compelled to do things like this. So I've been actually having a lot of fun when you find things that you've lost years ago, in amongst the horde. But so that's what I've been doing. That's why I've been absentee. I haven't fucked off to fight in Ukraine or anything like that. But speaking of which, the last video I did, it upset, well, not upset in a negative, in a bad way. It traumatized a lot of people, the details of what happened to the bodies at Waterloo. And yeah, that's what happens in war. You see, this whole thing of honor in war simply doesn't exist. And these films you all watched growing up, where they capture prisoners and they go off to become Steve McQueen, and most times prisoners are not taken; you're just murdered, you're robbed and killed. Though that scene in The Irishman, where Frank Sheeran, and he shows what he did in Italy in World War II, and they robbed the two German soldiers and made them dig their own graves and then shot them. That's exactly what happens in wars, and that's what it's like. That's what wars are like. And these people say things like, I think it's like an adventure. This is the NPC mindset. This is the normie mindset. And particularly in countries that have been very successful at war, the United States in particular, in recent times, they've had a very artificial sense of what war is. Because we'll talk about that in a minute, but it's I have absolutely no issue or problem whatsoever with someone who wants a career in the military, a career in soldiering, a career in the naval services, a career in aviation, the Air Force, anything like that, even in mechanics or anything. Good luck to them. That's if they're serious about that's the career they want. I have no problem with anyone. The soldier is much a part of the society, not this society, because our governments have continuously degraded our warriors, but the soldier is part of the society. The warrior is part of the tribe, just like the farmer, just like the fisherman, just like the tailor, the jailer, the druid, the priestess, the entertainer, the bard. They're all part of our tapestry. The warrior is part of that as well. And so I was talking about, I don't really like talking about politics, okay? And I'm not a political person, but when I talk about politics, I'm talking about it from the side, the concept of things like, not social psychology, sociology, culture, mass hysteria, and human behavior, the collective unconscious, and satirical things. I'm not taking sides. I have no time for either the left or the right. I'm not on any side. I don't take any political stance. I'm apolitical. But I observe these things when they come up my social media feed. I don't have TV. And I do it to just observe, they let me measure the psychic weather and the current paradigm in terms of how consciousness is adapting to it. So therefore, this is where the whole concept I developed of Ren fielding and the psychic weather came from. Which reminds me, there will be a very important psychic weather update on Timothy's show the Week in Strange I will be doing on Monday on the Beyond Room 313 channel. I've got a big important week, and it'll be an interesting one. You'll find this one interesting, but tune into the Week in Strange on Monday for this one. Fascinating. It's a new one. It's a brand new one. Brand new kind of psychic weather effect has come in, and it's very pronounced. But I have like my control specimens and test subjects, and along with the actual what's happening in the greater zeitgeist to read these things. But so it's coming out that, speaking of sheltered from reality and thinking war is like a comic book story or a video game, if they haven't been murdered by gangs, shot in the back for desertion, or killed, or ran away and somehow managed to get over the Polish border, the so-called foreign legions that went to the Reddit legions, the soy-jillers, the insurgency that went to be big heroes, losers, the local charmless, charismaless dope who wants to be a hero and went off to fight because of a few propaganda news broadcasts. It's looking like the worst case scenarios, just like with the Rona thing. It is absolutely true. The Rona needlecraft is absolutely true. That some of the stories you're hearing, they'd be hilarious if it didn't involve the loss of human life. And why I don't particularly care about these Muppets who got killed over there themselves. Remember, a lot of them are like losers who left kids at home in England and Ireland and other countries. They wouldn't take, these are losers. So there's families in there, like, not a family's fault if they raised a Muppet. They're left behind as widows who have no way, need to pay their bills, and this asshole is gone, But one story, aside from the ones who were robbed and shot by gangs as soon as they arrived, the ones who managed to get into there, texting to everybody where they were located, and a cruise missile was launched at where the hotel or hostel, wherever they were staying, was blown to bits, and loads were killed, and the ones who weren't killed were screaming, fleeing over the Polish border, going, "We went to war and shooting happened." This is literally what they're like. This is the same kind of NPC thing we saw in World War II. Be over by Christmas, lads. Oh, you'll be back home for chicken dinner at Christmas, lads. The turkey dinner at Christmas, boys. You'll be back home. Be back home. Jerry will fall by Christmas. This kind of thing. And same NPC normie, they can't think. They can't see beyond mainstream. They're so easily led. So that was the first one. The other ones just were given a contract to sign for life. Not for life, well, it's for life, indefinitely. And the professional ones, and the rest, the Ukrainian regular service officers said, we haven't got time to train anybody. We're in a war situation, So they have been using the Muppets that go over there to basically clear minefields, to draw sniper fire, and to be cannon fodder. And these guys thought they were going to be holding a machine gun in one hand, a cigar in their mouth, and a beautiful blonde Ukrainian bird in their arms while they were mowing down Russian tanks. That's literally what they thought. That's not an exaggeration. That's how their infantile, childlike minds work. Any chance to be a hero, even if it's completely illogical and irrational. And so they've all been used. If they haven't been killed they've all been killed in one way or another. Okay, and as of them are that Ukrainian paramilitary wing of their own, national army is an absolute vicious Nazi brutal murder squad. And so that's what happened to them, and most of them. Now, the ones who did have professional training, like who had combat experience in the Gulf or whatever, they've actually been put into frontline service. And they have even been saying that it's not the war they expected. And this is what we're saying again. When NATO went to fight a war, say you're a bunch of American, British, or other troops in Afghanistan, right? And you come across an enemy outpost. Well, you start shooting, and then you call in, right? And then the A-10 comes in and bombs them. You know, you very rarely would have hand-on-hand combat. You have air support, you have backup, you have computer, everything, like all the technological wizardry you need, right? What's happening right now in Ukraine, from what I gather, is World War Two all over again. It is large scale, open combat skirmishes. No NATO troop has ever fought in open skirmishes, I don't think, in ever. The last time we'd have to go back would be the British in the Falklands. And the British, even to this day, you talk to Paras and stuff like that, and you watch documentaries about the Falklands, and the Paras, you know, goose green. Now, that was some wicked fighting, you know, against the Argentinians. Gave them, you know, the Argentinians came very close to winning that war. They sunk a couple of battleships, and they, you know, it was only because they were demoralized, and they were not being a typical dictatorship. They weren't taken care of properly, but they were up for the fight. And even though the British defeated them, and it was a remarkable victory, no matter how you look at it, the that was probably the last time European Western troops, NATO type troops, I can think of, unless someone can correct me, fought in that kind of engagement, out in the fields, skirmishes, working in squads, hitting at the enemy. It has, you know, it's not Afghanistan or Iraq where, we have some enemies over here. We've been in a firefight. Yeah. Can we call in air support? The fucking, the Chinook helicopters with the rockets, or even, missiles or drones come in. It's not like that in the Ukraine. It is vicious. And these American and British NATO trained troops have been saying, it's rough. It's nothing like we've faced before. So they're all being killed. A lot of them are being killed. Now, there's one American guy who's obviously being protected. He's posting on Twitter, and he's posting all photographs of him liberating different towns from the Russians. And he's been shown as the default. He's obviously a recruiting thing, because they all think he's obviously someone who's a very high-end professional soldier who has been... The Ukrainians instantly recognized that in the guy, and they said, let's make a propaganda weapon of him. So he's all over Twitter. I was posting about his latest, taking out Russian tanks and stuff like that. And he's been very useful to the Ukrainians. He's obviously been protected by... They're obviously protecting him because they need him to bring more and more suckers over. To think they're all going to be doing what he's doing. But meanwhile, he's a professional. This is what I'm saying about professional soldiery. It's a very difficult thing, And don't be surprised if he gets killed at some point. If things start going really bad for the Ukrainians, don't be surprised if he suddenly gets killed and it's used to hate Russians because of that. So don't be surprised if he's not sacrificed. Okay. Now this is what dirty war is. Now, another aspect of this is we have been told by the Western media that the Russians are being annihilated by the Ukrainians. That's not possible, because they'd already be back in Russia if it was true. They're still... What it seems to me, and I'm not an expert, and I'm not there, and I'm not observing everything, but I have looked at some reliable sources. The impression I currently get, and I could be wrong, is that the Russians only had specific territorial objectives in the Ukraine. It wasn't a general invasion. Of course, they have to knock out military targets all around the country because it's part of a wider war, but they were only interested in occupying certain territory, which they have captured. And now they're holding it. And the Ukrainians are in a war of trying to retrieve that territory from the Russians. Now, that's what it seems to me. So I saw a video last week where they said that they showed, apparently, it turned out there was supposed to be Russian helicopters being vaporized in the sky by surface-to-air missiles, and it turned out that was from a video game. And the only videos I'm hearing that people are seeing coming out of Ukraine And what I heard are pretty gruesome. The Ukrainian army, anyone who they any man under the age of 40 or who they remotely suspect of being a deserter or trying to run away from fighting, they're shooting them on the spot. There's wholesale execution of Ukrainian men who don't want to fight at the hands of this neo-Nazi squads who make up a sizable proportion of the Ukrainian armed forces prior to the war. And this whole thing of Putin is a lunatic and this kind of stuff, it's obviously not true. But I'm not taking sides. I'm not taking one side or the other. I'm trying to be like floating over the battlefield, trying to figure out what's going on. From what I gather is how this all came about is that NATO and particularly the European Union for about 10 years has been continually provoking the Russians by trying to get Ukraine into the EU, by trying to get the Ukrainians into NATO, by trying to, because remember, this would be like the Soviet Union building massive military bases along the Mexican border with Texas. It would not make you feel comfortable. So they were constantly prodding and poking the Russian bear. On top of that, we now know that the Biden family biolabs were doing some of the most cretinous and despicable things there that make the Wuhan virus stuff look like Mickey Mouse stuff. So therefore they had a biological catastrophe on the doorsteps, had Russia. Again, I'm not taking sides. I'm not justifying any invasion. I'm just saying this is what it seems to me. It seems to me that up until the invasion happened, the likes of Biden and the Western powers in the EU didn't believe it was going to happen. They kept saying Putin will invade tomorrow. Remember this crap? Putin will invade this weekend. Putin will invade tomorrow. And no one ever expected it to happen. Most of all, the Pentagon and NATO and all these types and all the intelligence services. And Putin called their bluff by actually doing it. And they got caught with their knickers down in all kinds of ways. They did not expect that. Now again, I'm not taking sides, and I have great sympathy for people in the Ukraine, regardless of what their ethnic origin is, Russian or Slavic or Ukrainian, who are getting killed and caught up in this crap. I don't trust that guy Zelensky as far as I could throw him. I look at him, the more I look at him, the more I see as an opportunist psychopath. I would actually say that he's far more evil than Putin. I look at him, his body language. He looks like the kind of fucker who would move into your house, ask to stay for a weekend, come in, drink all your beer, shag your wife, and eat all your food, and then fuck off and never call you again. That's the type he reminds me of. And this motherfucker is actually trying to goad the world into a nuclear war just for his own personal benefit. And why in the name of God is he being celebrated as some kind of paragon of virtue is beyond me. And we know this always happens. We know how Bin Laden was the golden boy of the Mujahideen. And how everyone, the newspapers said he was wonderful until he showed his true colours. So this has always happened through history. Adolf Hitler in the 30s. And speaking of which, and again, I'm not anti-Ukrainian, I'm not anti-Russian, I'm not pro this or pro, I'm just observing. It fucking amazing, we all know it's amazing enough that all these Western lefties and liberals are all supporting neo-Nazi death squads in the Ukrainian military. That's bad enough, okay? But the hypocrisy is staggering on other levels. Now, although I know the Ukraine suffered horribly under the Bolsheviks and Stalin and starved to death. Again, I'm not picking on ordinary people. The Ukraine has been elevated to this paragon of virtue, this saintly nation this nation of pure virtue, and everyone thinks they are. The Ukrainians were one of the worst in the Holocaust. The murders and killings of Jews there were sadistic and enormous. And if you read about what happened in Odessa and in the Crimean Peninsula, using the Romanian army to do it mostly, but helping the Romanian army, the stories are just, when you read them, they're as bad, they're inconceivable, the wickedness of it. So it amazes me now, all these Hollywood celebrities of Ukrainian extraction, all Jewish, like Leonard Nimoy's family, talking about how they were very proud that their father was Ukrainian, when they had to escape pogroms in that part of the world because they were Jewish. Now suddenly that's all been forgotten, and Ukraine is a paragon of blissful virtue, wonderful place, where from the moment the country was founded to the present, it's been populated by nothing but beautiful souls who just want to live in peace and fly turtle doves into the ether. It's amazing. It's amazing to me. At the same time, too, the Russians who saved us from National Socialism, the Russians won World War II. The Russians defeated the Third Reich, not the Soviets. Remember, when when they were told to fight for the Soviet Union and communism, the Russians got the shit kicked out of them in Operation Barbarossa. 3 million dead. It was unbelievable in no time. It was when the communists, being the scum that they are, and we always know, you know what they say, the last refuge of a scoundrel is prayer. Well, the last refuge of a political scoundrel is patriotism. Just like when I'll talk about the Irish stuff in a minute. This is a pot of tea one, okay? I should have told you at the beginning. The Bolsheviks and Stalin and the rest of the communists, the Politburo, decided that the only way the Russian people were going to fight for Russia was they were never going to die for communism, but they'll die for Mother Russia. And suddenly they told them that they had to. That's what Stalingrad happened. They were fighting for Russia. They weren't fighting for Stalin. And this kind of thing, okay? So that's what, and it was when that was turned around and saying you're fighting for Mother Russia, you're fighting for your Russian family, you're fighting for, you're fighting for the heritage of Russia. You're from this, when the communists came in, they said this is a new start. The Soviet Union is not Russia; it's a new place. And when they tried to, then when they went to war, it was a complete failure, because no one's going to fight for a political ideology. No average person. But when so the Russians had to say, you're now on the same lineage of the ones who were under Catherine the Great and Peter the Great, the Russian imperial forces. You're back to that again, and then you're fighting for Mother Russia, and then they went. Then they kicked the Germans, kicked the Third Reich's ass, and that's who. So the Russians. It's amazing to me that we in Europe avoided National Socialism because the Russians made the ultimate sacrifice. I'm not degrading the Americans at D-Day and the British and the French and all the other forces that fought, Polish and all the others. They all did great as well, but the Norwegians at Telemark and all that stuff. But it was the Russians who won the war, realistically. And it wasn't just because they were sending millions in to get them slaughtered. They had phenomenal. The Russian shock troops were the best troops in Europe. They were even better than the stormtroopers in the Wehrmacht, or the American airborne. The Russian tank, the T-34, was the best tank in World War II. It could travel really fast. It could hit. Shells used to fly off because of the shape and stuff like that. The Germans were shocked. They thought the Russians couldn't build anything, and they had no time. They developed the best tanks in the war that were very easily maintained and fixed, where you had like a Tiger or a Panzer. And the American tanks were death traps until they got the Persian out there. The American tanks were death traps. More Americans died, I think, in tanks, in percentage-wise, tank crews, inside the M tanks and the than they did. The British had very good tanks as well, but the Americans had terrible tanks until the Persian came along. The Germans had superb tanks, but the problem was, like everything else, they over technically developed them, so they were very dependent on not everything working like clockwork. Where the T-34 that the Russians had, it was fast, maneuverable, and easy to repair. And that's why the Russians won and the Germans were knocked out. Now, so we owe a great debt of gratitude to the Russian people for freeing Europe from National Socialism. And so what do we get now? The Russians are the scum of the earth, we're told. They're horrible people, they're animals. When, for instance, now, but whose animals? I have, you would think that we would be getting news reports with Russian generals saying the most depraved things. Go and exterminate this village. And there's nothing like that. But where are we getting them from? The fucking Ukrainians. A Ukrainian general actually said that any Russian soldier has a choice: castrated and sent back to Russia, or shot on the spot. And he was serious, he wasn't joking. And he had to apologize for it later. The Ukrainians are castrating Russian troops when they find them. This is what Slavic on-the-ground wars are like. You look at Yugoslavia, this is what they are like. They are not, Roger that, call in air support. We're fighting the Taliban, they're 14 miles away. There's 7 of them and there's 500 of us. We urgently need air support, otherwise we'll have to get 10 miles closer. And there'll be 3 of them left, and there's only be 640 of us. Calling in air support. It's not like that. It's like fucking animal killing, machine gunning, close quarter range, grenades, being fucking horror. That's what the kind of war that's been fought there. And even the best well-intentioned NATO troops have not been trained for that. And that's not to disparage brave NATO troops who did amazing things in other countries, but they're not been trained for this. Not there for troops can only fight for the wars they're trained for. And that's why before World War II happened, before D-Day happened, American generals were absolutely terrified that Americans would be slaughtered because they were so naive. They were all being trained in England and they thought it was just going to step off the boat at Normandy or wherever, and it was just going to walk up to the beach and, kill a few Jerrys and stuff like that, Krauts and all this stuff. They were terrified. This is why, literally in the days before D-Day happened, they were doing live ammo training with American troops just to try and say, look, fucking guys, this is what's really going to be like. Really going. And the British troops who had already been at Dunkirk and places like that, the ones who had the remains of the British Expeditionary Force and the Free French Army, were generals were trying to explain to the Americans, it's not going to be like John Wayne. It's going to be awful and dangerous. The American generals knew this, but they had to kick that naivety. Now, where did that naivety end? Ultimately, when the First Army Airborne and those landed on Omaha Beach, that was the baptism of fire. And from that moment on, the Americans were ready, but they were not ready before that. And one of the reasons of the high casualty rates at Normandy compared to the other beaches where the Canadians and the French and the British landed was because the Americans were not prepared for what they were about to face. Where the other ones, maybe not the Canadians, but they were embedded in with the British anyway, but so they would have been familiar with, they would have hear what the British was, they knew what they were up against. Now, I'm not disparaging anything. It was a fucking unbelievable thing to get off and to wait for the front door of a landing craft and in charge of the beach, but they weren't ready. They weren't. So that's what's happening. So these trained NATO troops are still not in a way ready because they've never fought this kind of war. If there were still troops that were young enough that fought the Falklands War in the British Army going there, they would understand. The same kind of thing. War is nothing like movies have portrayed it out to be. The nearest ones would be like Full Metal Jacket or The Cross of Iron, but it's even worse than that. And even 1917, it's even worse than that. And And so we're supposed to hate the Russians, but yet we owe them an enormous debt of gratitude. And I'm not going to hate them because the TV, some animal celebrity on TV told me, or some scumbag animal politician. Remember, politicians, all of them are animals. Remember that. You don't trust any of them. And they always appeal to patriotism in the same way a caught criminal or a scumbag, a scoundrel, reverts to prayer. One of the prime examples, like I was watching, just because I can't believe it actually happened, every so often I watch the current Prime Minister of Ireland, before he's Prime Minister, I watched a video of him standing up in the Irish Parliament, the Dáil, and saying we will have no more talk of backward nationalism. Now, when you think of the sacrifices Irish people made for that building to exist, for him to stay that in, it just shows the depravity of this mediocre monster. They're all mediocre, and that's what you see that all Klaus Schwab's babies, all his leaders, Jacinta Ardern, Trudeau, Macron, Boris Johnson, Leo Varadkar, Dan Andrews, they're all mediocre. They would be, in any other world, they would be no higher than a local civil servant in a local town council. But because they need mediocrity running governments, because ultimately the plans are coming from beyond, from supranational operations, they need mediocre civil servants as statesmen in the country. That's why you get like a Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland, and all kind of other freaks in around the world running governments. But I was reading when Ireland got its independence in 1922, there was a civil war broke out because one half of the IRA said, look, we just defeated the British in a war. We won. Why are we giving them Northern Ireland as a peace settlement? We want the whole country and we want the whole republic. We do not want Dominion status. Michael Collins and Arthur Griffin and the ones who signed the treaty, said, it's a building block towards full independence and a republic. Because although the IRA had defeated the British and the Irish had won the War of Independence, there was no ammo left. They had exhausted all the ammo. And they had endless numbers of troops, but they hadn't got the army, the ammo and the gear and the weapons. They'd exhausted everything. That was one of the reasons that Collins went to the peace talks. And he said to them, look, it's a building block to start, okay? And they were like, no, a republic or nothing. So a civil war broke out, and there was De Valera and his people walked out of the government, and Michael Collins and Arthur Griffith tried to run the country. A civil war broke out, and it was vicious and brutal, okay? And horrible things, the tragic sadness of it, where you have fellas who fought, good men who fought for Ireland's independence, suddenly shooting at each other in fields or on streets. And one of the most tragic stories of all was of an Irish at one point when things got really bad for the anti-treaty side, we'll call at this point the IRA, the old IRA, they said it'd be okay, start shooting politicians. So outside government buildings in Dublin, a politician was shot dead. In retaliation, some of 4 prisoners from the other side who were held in Dublin after they had been routed out at the forecourts when they took it over by Michael Collins, 4 of them were randomly taken and executed. They were just randomly picked. I don't think it was like a lottery thing. Just as a warning to the others, if you shoot any more politicians, we'll shoot all your prisoners. And they executed them. And one of them who was executed, I can't remember his name, he was the head of the IRA in Belfast. He was actually a very well-liked man. He So, like so many of them, he was a scholar and a gentleman. He wasn't some kind of thug terrorist. He didn't want any kind of sectarian attacks on Protestants, and even though he'd lost his job for being a Catholic, he didn't want any sectarian attacks on Protestants in Belfast and Northern Ireland. He says, totally go on for the security forces and so on. When he was executed in Dublin. The guy who had assigned his death warrant was the fella who the guy he'd had killed was his best man at his wedding a few months before, a year before. That's how bad it was. Imagine signing the death warrant of the guy, the execution order of the guy who was your best man at your wedding only a year prior. And that's the kind of, and when it happened, even on the other side, people were saying we're shooting really good men. Just like when Michael Collins was killed, the IRA were like, should have happened. It was just, we've lost a good man. This was the kind of attitude. This is the kind of genuine suffering and heartbreak that freed this country and created a building that Micheál Martin could stand in 80 years later and announce we will have no more talk of backward nationalism, dancing on the graves of men like that, Michael Collins, Arthur Griffith, Cathal Brugha, and countless others who created that building, that he could actually say that. And just to appease his European Union masters. We have some very sick, mediocre motherfuckers running our countries. And this is the real poison. It's mediocrity. And within mediocrity, you've seen that from Kafka novels and Dostoevsky novels, and even Orwell's 1984 and The Inner Party. Mediocrity in government breeds viciousness, because the only way mediocrity cannot be found out is totalitarianism, and hence why all the most mediocre ones, Jacinta Ardern, Dan Andrews, Leo Varadkar, Nicola Sturgeon, Macron, Emmanuel Macron, Justin Trudeau, why they were the most vicious during the whole pandemic, lockdown and restrictions, because mediocrity can only retain power through brutality, third party brutality. And truth, behind every reason, how long have I been telling you that the most despicable, vicious, and treacherous maggot, dangerous maggot in this world is a frightened, weak man? So they put frightened, weak men and women in charge of our countries because they know that if something goes wrong at home and people start saying, why do we have this loser running the show? That loser, that mediocre individual, will enforce the worst kinds of brutality, restrictions, and fascism in order to protect themselves, because they all know they're mediocre inside. This is why there's no strength in these people. If you had a national leader, let's play our famous game again. Thomas Sheridan, Lord Protector of Ireland, right? Something happens and I'm in charge, right? And we play this fantasy game again. My number one priority would not be to stay in power, not to play on the Irish insecurity complex by brown-nosing bigger entities and larger supernatural bodies around the world by saying, aren't we Irish, aren't we lovely, aren't we wonderful, aren't we great, look, we're doing what you said, look, what can we fucking wonder? Wouldn't be that. My number one thing would be the welfare of the Irish people. All of them, regardless of ethnicity, background, race, all of them. Religion, all of them. And that would be number one, nothing else. But because I'm not mediocre, and because I haven't craved power all my life, I don't look towards more powerful entities like the EU, and in order to protect my ass. This today is a monumental day. Today, April 1st, was the day that many thousands of NHS workers in the UK were to be fired for not taking the Jabberwocky needlecraft. Today was the day. Same thing happened in many countries. Remember what I said? Corona will lose its shine by April 9. The day is April 1st. What had happened was, in early 2020, Western governments, backed up by supranational organizations, the European Union, the World Economic Forum, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, NATO, declared war upon their own subjects. They declared war upon us. And one of the primary weapons in that war, apart from coercion, propaganda, and blackmail, and murdering you in hospitals, and particularly murdering you in old people's homes, and destroying the society by not being allowed to visit your family members. The same governments who told you when there was less cases of the Rona that you couldn't see your elderly family members, and now there's more cases and infections of Rona, are saying, bring a Ukrainian family from Pakistan and Kashmir into your home. This is what you're fucking dealing with. Will you wake the fuck up? You normies, you dumb fuck normies out there, who still believe everything you see on the TV news. This was siege warfare. They imposed siege. When Boris Johnson said to the NHS staff, jab or you lose your job by April 1st, you lose your job on April 1st, 2022, that was siege warfare. The siege was on. Sieges have been placed everywhere upon ordinary working people. And so many people bottled it, but a lot of people slammed the gates, the town gates closed and said and screamed no surrender with siege holds. And what they had, they held. And I told everybody to wait, just wait. Don't break the siege. And they didn't break the siege. And people who are in, and even Austria, the siege has been broken. All that talk, mandatory vax, is all stopped. The sieges have been broken. Because mediocrity, despite having all its propaganda, all its power, all its police forces, is still mediocrity. And all it takes is a small number of determined people to draw a line in the sand and say, what we have, we hold. Not an inch further. That's all it takes. And by Jesus did that work. And that's why I will not listen to people who say, a huge part of it was Dr. Robert Malone on Joe Rogan. That was a huge part of it. That was incredible. That really made it a lot easier. But we won. We beat them. So don't give yourself credit for that. But the war is still ongoing. These mediocrity still needs to declare war on someone. Right now, it's Russia. The mediocre types of Ireland and Canada and everywhere else can now point the fingers. Evil Russians, evil Russians, evil Russians. And finally, I have one more thing to say. If you're one of these people who took in Ukrainian refugees, and like I predicted, and I'm not Nostradamus, I'm just good at reading. I see the world with a clarity. That's what I'm good at. And you got yourself Ukrainian refugees, Mohammed and Fatima from Kashmir, and their 9 kids and 3 wives. Fuck you. If you were one of those types who now is having serious medical complications and mocked people like me and others who tried to help you, look, read the Lancet, read John Hopkins' medical thing. This thing really is not good. Don't take it. And call those of us who don't have a racist bone in our body far-right conspiracy theorist, and you're now suffering. Fuck you. If you are one of these parents with all that information out there, gloatingly injected your child and your child is dead or dying after you paraded the child on Facebook, fuck you. Fuck you all. And those of you who are trying to get me to believe that all the problems in my life are caused by Russian people on the other side of Europe, all of them, and my problems will be solved by this dead-eyed, cretinous creature, Zelensky, who's been held up as a paragon of virtue. Well, fuck you too.